Welcome to the Republican Professor. I'm your host, Dr. Lucas J. Mather. Today is Tuesday, 28 July, 2026 years after Muhammad. JK, after Santa Claus. JK, after Napoleon. JK, after Napoleon Dynamite. That's right. After Napoleon Dynamite. We measure the world in terms of how long it's been around by the release of the film Napoleon Dynamite. By the way, the girl that played Deb in that came to my office hours at Moore Park College, my logic office hours one time. Actually, she sat in my class. She was friends with one of my students, and my students. I mentioned Napoleon Dynamite in class. I did like an impression of something, and the student came to my office hours. No, the student came up to me in break because it was a night class. I think it was during the summer 2006. And this student said, I know Deb from Napoleon Dynamite. We grew up together. And I said, nuh-uh. And she said, yeah, and I'll call her right now. And she came like seriously within, I think, 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes, and hung out with us. Before I had an iPhone, before I had a camera, I got an iPhone, I think in 2007. That's why I'm able to date it because I didn't have a camera on me, and otherwise I would have taken pictures. But so we hung out. It's weird. That actually happened. My life is weird. All right, let's we're in Fame and the Founding Fathers again, part two. And we're continuing on with our theme of the 250th anniversary of the United States of Murica. This is an essay by Douglas Adair, who taught history at Claremont Colleges and the College of William and Mary, but Claremont Colleges is the connection from which I know him. And he taught my mentor, Dr. Michael Uhlmann. And Michael Uhlmann was the one that turned me on to this material. And we got through the first of four sections in this article called Fame and the Founding Fathers, originally given in the mid 60s as a speech and published in a book 1967. And we talked about that the first episode. Go back to the first episode, which was last month, I think it was. Maybe I should review that. Um, it was earlier this year. Of course, it was earlier this year. Duh. Let me look really quick. 2 weeks ago, it says. Okay, well, I guess it was in July. Sorry. It was in early July. Let me see the date here real quick. It was July 6th. Hmm. Yeah. Okay, July 6th that we did the first of the series there. So go back to July 6th and you'll see the waterfall in the background. It's that one. I've got a Dennis Prager shirt on. You can't miss it. We are heading into number two, starting on page 10. We're going to do a fair use of this, make a transformative reading of it. We'd like to thank Dr. Douglas Adair for writing this and presenting it. We'd like to thank Liberty Fund for making this material available again after it went out of print, I think. So thank you, Liberty Fund. Send some support their way. Liberty Fund Inc. in Indianapolis, Indiana. And we're going to discuss this material. I think it's very interesting stuff. I hope you do as well. Adair starts bottom page 10, number 2, by saying that is not this merely stating a truism? What is that? Let's go back to the previous sentence, the last sentence in number one. The specific reward striven for thus affects behavior. It is my argument that the lust for the psychic reward of fame, honor, glory after 1776 becomes a key ingredient in the behavior of Washington and his greatest contemporaries. Listen again to Hamilton, who, like Franklin and Jefferson and Madison, and unlike Washington or John Adams, seems never to have really cared about getting rich, who died almost bankrupt. Quote, the desire for reward is one of the strongest incentives for human conduct. But there are rewards, and the different rewards and different ends men strive for to control to a degree the means they employ to win their ends. The specific reward striven for thus affects behavior. It is my argument, Adair said, the bottom of his section number one, that the lust for psychic reward of fame, glory, honor, and glory after 1776 becomes a key ingredient in the behavior of Washington and his greatest contemporaries. Is not this merely stating a truism? He continues in number two. Isn't this merely saying that all men like to be praised? And does the desire to be praised, admired, and thought well of really set this revolutionary generation apart from modern politicians, college teachers, or contemporary businessmen? Is it obvious from the title of this paper that I do think that it makes a difference? That the desire for sovereign honor, the passion for fame in the 18th century is a special variety of praise sought from a particular audience, and it is different both in degree and kind from the desire of approval that animates most 20th century Americans. Today, the word fame, the concept of the love of fame as a ruling passion, has for us but a faint and tattered remnant of its 18th century meaning. Now, this is a key part here. Remember, he's writing and presenting this in the mid 1960s, but I think it's very applicable today. Honor, in the traditional sense, is used hardly at all now. Yeah. And the word fame has been vulgarized and democratized. For example, in a recent issue of Look magazine, March 9th, 1965, thanks for putting that in there, Adair, an interview with Richard Burton and Liz Taylor entitled King and Queen quotes Burton's pronouncement, fame you get accustomed to, but if it ever takes possession of you, then you're in trouble, implying that an actor gets stuck up and offends his fans if he assumes his popularity is permanent, if he tries to build an enduring monument. This application of a noble word to the ephemeral, bubble-like reputation of a Welsh actor and his wife would have astonished George Washington and his contemporaries. I think that's worth sitting with for a moment. Clearly, Burton and the Look editors, the Look magazine, it always reminds me of that Christmas Story film. Clearly, Burton and the Look editors, who solemnly print his comments on the fame of Liz and Dick as a serious statement, define fame as a synonym for great mass popularity, the approval and acclaim of a populace, the judgment to quote Milton, of a herd confused, a miscellaneous rabble who extol things vulgar. Popularity in the view of the 18th century, and here he's quoting Samuel Johnson's Dictionary of the English Language, London, 1756. I need to get a copy of that. Here's the here's footnote 3. Populace, the vulgar, the multitude. Popular, vulgar, plebeian, suitable to the common people, familiar, not critical. Popularity, gracious among the people, representation suited to vulgar conception, what affects the vulgar, popularly, in a popular manner, so as to please the crowd. Okay, that's popularity. There's a footnote 3 there that we just read that footnote. Okay, popularity in the view of the 18th century, and he's quoting Samuel Johnson, Dictionary of the English Language, was really the small change, the copper coinage of true fame, of golden glory. They would mock Burton's complacency with Goldsmith's couplet of praise a mere glutton, he swallowed what came, and the puff of a dunce he mistook it for fame. There is too little time this evening. Remember, Adair is presenting this, he's presenting this verbally before it was put down permanently, okay, in writing. There's too little time this evening to explore the 18th century concept of fame and its cognates, glory, and honor, except in, we're going to page 12 at the top now, the most superficial way. It is clear, however, from even the most cursory check of the literature of Europe from the age of the Renaissance to the 19th century, that these words indicate values and interests that fascinated successive generations of moralists, artists, preachers, politicians, playwrights, soldiers, and poets. These are books written on the subject. Fame is analyzed by Machiavelli and Montaigne, by Bacon, by Hobbes, by eggs and toast, Bolingbroke, Mandeville, Adam Smith, literally hundreds of other writers. Shakespeare's of trilogy of plays on Henry the Fourth, Henry the Fifth, deals explicitly with the pursuit of honor and the ethical and moral pitfalls along the way. Addison and Steele in The Spectator, and countless other journalists comment, criticize, compare the different types of honor and different kinds of fame. Pope in 1711, and that's AD, not BC, will compose a 500-line poem called The Temple of Fame. And later in the century, Edward Young will take 2,500 lines and 7 books to describe the love of fame, the universal passion. That's the name of the book, I think. It's italicized. This summary merely scratches at the surface. We're in Fame and the Founding Fathers by Dr. Douglas Adair, uh, an influential historian teacher in the mid 1960s, presenting this. Now, most of us in common speech today use the words honor, glory, and fame as if their meanings were exactly interchangeable. Yeah, and I think the same would go for like Twitter fame or, going viral on TokTik or TikTok. Certs. Is that one of those media companies? Um, spearmint. Uh, sorry that I'm getting. Sorry, I'm talking breath freshener. I'm on breath fresheners right now. I'm not sure why. Um, well, anyway, sorry about that. I zoomed back to the 80s for a sec. Instagram, right? Instagram fame, same thing. He's talking about the same thing. So we've just switched the Look magazine for Insta parallelogram. So uh, 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 most of us in common speech today use the words honor, glory, and fame as if their meanings were exactly interchangeable. The three words, although they share the common ingredient of praise and blame, although they all assume some independent audience that judges and assesses behavior in order to award praise or blame, each differ very significantly as to who that audience is and when the praise or blame is awarded. Glory, glory in its core meaning is an attribute of God, and strictly speaking, of God alone. God is not famous, nor is Jesus designated as the honorable, though a devout Christian writing on honor, Robert Ashley, 1596, can speak of the Godhead itself as the wellspring and fountain of all honor. The concept of glory assumes that he's capitalized, is always watching men and sparrows, and that those men who conscious that God's eye is continually on them, behave with such piety and goodness in rendering homage to him capitalized, will shine with reflections of his glory, his capitalized, page 13 at the top. Saints, through their divinity, acquired by their love of God, and their through their actions pleasing to God, diffuse his glory among mankind. Halos, aurelos, aurel, aureola. I don't know how to say that word. Aurelis. I don't know. Nimbuses, as Dr. Johnson's dictionary notes, are called glories and are iconographic symbols in Christian art of those who in their lives glorify God and shine in the reflected light of his glory. The concept of honor, like the concept of glory, is both the goal of character formation and an instrument of social control, building into the heart and mind of an individual a powerful personal sense of socially expected conduct. Hmm. A pattern of behavior calculated to win praise from his contemporaries who are his social equals or superiors. For a particular person in a particular culture, a sense of honor, a sense of due self esteem, of proper pride, of dignity appropriate to his station, acts like conscience for a practicing Christian. Hmm. Like conscience, it is capable of inspiring in some men and women systemized and regularized conduct that is noble, magnanimous, and admirable. Page 13 in the middle. However, as an eminent 17th century English divine, John Rogers, noted, honor differs from conscience because it is rooted in its intense regard to the censure of the world at a particular time in a given place. Honor, thus, is inevitably conservative and is linked with the morale of the status quo. It is elitist for small male in groups, traditionally those that are freeborn, well-born, and well-bred, who by implication alone possess that instinct and spur called honor. Thus, the concept of honor in a social sense is narrow, technical, and exclusive. As T.V. Smith comments, a code of honor, even at its best, is ethically reactionary. Honor all too easily becomes an adjunct of the unequal distribution of power and privilege in a historic society. It attaches itself to status by ascription. Page 14 at the top. When Jefferson in 1785 urged his young nephew, Peter Carr, if ever he was tempted to do a dishonorable act, though it can never be known but to yourself, ask yourself how you would act if all the world were looking at you, and act accordingly. He advocated. Okay, so he advocated a pattern of manners which we today can admire only in part, for the Virginia Gentleman's Code of 1785, which was Carr's world, judged women to be intellectual inferiors and accepted chattel slavery as proper and a necessary institution. Mm. Honor, thus, is primarily a private ethic that links a person's identity with social stratification or occupational specialization. It is an ethic of competition, of combat, of struggle for eminence and distinction, and therefore honor is traditionally antithetical to the Christian demands of humility, abnegation, abnegation, and altruism. Okay. One notes little organic unity between codes of honor and norms of social welfare, T.V. Smith observes. Fame, in contrast to honor, is more public, more inclusive, and looks to the largest possible human audience, horizontally in space and vertically in time. Fame is celebrity, renown. That's Dr. Johnson. It is the action or behavior of a great man who stands out, who towers above his fellows in some spectacular way. To be famous or renowned means to be widely spoken of by a man's contemporaries, and also to act in such a way that posterity also remembers his name and his actions. The desire for fame is thus a dynamic element in the historical process. It rejects the static, complacent urge in the human heart to merely be. I don't like that split infinitive, Adair. I thought we were on the same team. To merely be, and invites a strenuous effort to become a person and force in history larger than the ordinary. The love of fame encourages a man to make history, to leave the mark of his deeds and his ideals on the world. It incites a man to refuse to be the victim of events and to become an event-making personality, a being never to be forgotten by those later generations that will be born into the world, a world his actions helped to shape. Page 15 at the top. It is thus this dynamism, one could almost say demonic quality, in the desire for fame that leads classical authors and their 17th and 18th century commentators to use the metaphor of the spur or the goad when fame is discussed. Glory, at least in strict Protestant thought, is a gift through the grace of God. Honor can be inherited, as the Duke of Wellington is supposed to have said about the Order of the Garter. There need be no damned nonsense about merit involved, but fame has to be earned. Fame can never be a gift. It cannot be inherited. It must be won by a person who imposes his will, his ideas, for good or ill, upon history in such a way that he will always be remembered. Notice there is an ambiguity in the love of fame as a ruling passion. A little water. If it is a passion, a lust, a desire that takes possession of one, it can produce actions on occasion that are memorable because of their superlative wickedness or their vice. If a person, frantic at the threat of death and oblivion, determines to become famous at any cost, he may act as Herostratus, the man who burned down the temple of Diana at Ephesus in order to immortalize himself. Fame, thus, may be morally neutral. A man may stand out in his time and after because he's brilliant and a forceful scoundrel. Plutarch's Lives of the Noble Greeks and Romans offers standing proof that preeminence and fame may be divorced from private virtue or public good. The great tradition of fame, however, is neither ethically blind nor morally neutral. Let me look here really quick. There is a footnote 7. It quotes Ovid, Tacitus, Helvidius, Helvidius Priscus, Street Augustine, Dante, Ben Jonson, Milton, Steele, and Burke. What's that? Saint August? No, it says St. dot. That's street. It's what? It's short for saint. Why don't you just spell saint out? It's not that long of a word. Oh, that's true. Street is not that long of a word. But when you're writing on an envelope, street, it makes sense to, like we use CA for California because there's not a lot of room on an envelope. I think it's Street Augustine. Yeah. Well, just be it's post office. Just go ask them. Yeah, I don't think it's Saint. That would make no sense. It's got to be Street Augustine. Yeah, tell him I'll call him back. We got a caller calling in about the way I pronounced Street Augustine. Okay, that's footnote 7. Okay, the great tradition of fame, however, is neither ethically blind nor morally neutral. The audience that men who desire fame are incited to act before is the audience of the wise and the good in the future. Page 16 at the top. Yes, that's true. That part of posterity that can discriminate between virtue and vice. That audience that can recognize egotism transmuted gloriously into public service. The love of fame is a noble passion because it can transform ambition and self-interest into dedicated effort for the community, because it can spur individuals to spend themselves to provide for the common defense or to promote the general welfare, and even on occasion to establish justice in a world where justice is extremely rare. It is clear, I think, that the desire for fame is primarily the desire for immortality. Hmm. Fame defeats that threat of oblivion with which death confronts every man. In our age, when medical knowledge has lengthened the span of life and somewhat banished the fear of death to the fringes of consciousness, we forget what an omnipresent specter it was even 200 years ago. In England at the beginning of the 18th century, of every 100 babies born alive, 36 died before the age of 6. 24 more before the age of 16, 15 more before the age of 26. Wow, that's a lot. Okay, so then every 100 babies born alive, 36% before the age of 6, 24% more before the age of 16. So that right there is 60%. And then 15 more, that would be 75% before the age of 26. Is that right? 75% died before they were 26? Jeez. Thus, wow, only a quarter of the population survived to reach full maturity. In mid 18th century America, rich, healthy America, Franklin would actually celebrate the fact that only half of American children died before coming of age. Wow. So we must remember that the ever present consciousness of death stood in the forefront of our ancestors' minds in the 18th century. We must recognize the hope of fame, like the hope of Christian immortality, is a mode for dealing with proud death and conquering him. Carl Becker, bottom page 16 here, saw this connection and wrote mockingly and ironically of it in his somewhat perverse little classic, The Heavenly City of the 18th Century Philosophers. Becker notes Diderot's statement that posterity is for the philosopher what the other world is for the religious man. Becker then links this 18th century concern with posterity's opinion to the idea of progress and presents the paradoxical argument that the idea of fame as a mode of immortality is merely a metamorphosis of medieval Christian values. In fact, the tradition of fame and honor that was most significant to the American revolutionaries, and the French too, for that matter, predates Christianity itself. It is classical in its origin. Let me look at footnote 8. Okay, he quotes Aristotle's Ethics, Cicero's De Officiis, and that was written 40 years before the birth of Christ, Cicero. All right, fair enough. Okay, so it's classical in its origin, and educated men of the Enlightenment were drilled and educated in it at college, not at church. From the Renaissance, with its revival of classical values, it parallels and competes with the Christian tradition. Not that the two don't intermingle and overlap often in the 18th century. See, for example, Franklin's setting up as models to be imitated Jesus and Socrates. And see also, too, the climactic third act of the most popular English play of the century, Addison's Cato, for its mingling of Christian and pagan dreams of immortality. Huh. I don't think I've ever read that play. The footnotes are decent. I'm going to skip footnote 9 though. It's a little bit longer. Um, uh, yeah, so Addison's Cato for its mingling of Christian and pagan dreams of immortality. However, the point that must be made is that the classical tradition of fame usually has nothing in it of progress or future perfectibility of man. What it does have, looking backward, is a pantheon of models that an 18th century individual was invited to copy and emulate if he would win secular glory and immortality. Just as the medieval Christian was urged by Thomas à Kempis to the imitation of Christ and was offered in the Bible models of piety, so in the classical tradition, Plutarch's lives of the noble Greeks and Romans offered examples of heroism and secular virtue, standing in Plutarch's words as a sort of looking glass in which a man may see how to adjust and adorn his own life. Fame and the Founding Fathers, Section 2 by Douglas Adair. In this volume, made available by Liberty Fund Incorporated. Go out and get your copy today. Get a physical copy and follow along. This was it's got lots of his speeches and articles. Um, this is the first one, and it's the same title as the volume itself. We're going to push forward into number 3 a bit. So this is the third section on bottom page 17 starting. The reason is because 3 is a big chunk. It goes from 17 to 30. So we're going to push into this a bit. The American revolutionaries found in Plutarch not merely a generalized image of glory, but one very specific and concrete type of fame, page 18 at the top, that became most meaningful to the greatest of our revolutionary leaders after 1776. This is a tradition of fame almost completely forgotten in the 20th century America. It is a pattern Plutarch offers, a model he provides of the great lawgiver and the founder of a commonwealth. Perhaps the easiest way to rediscover it is to listen to a dialogue, to recreate a dramatic scene that occurred in Philadelphia, April 11th, 1791. The founder of a commonwealth. There's a street that our landlord, I work for a church, and our landlord has a giant building. It's one of these mainline Protestant denominations that was what we would call a mega church or something like that, with thousands of members back in the 1960s, 1970s. And it's one of the historic churches of our town in Southern California. And the the street that it's on is called Commonwealth. You don't really hear that term a lot, but the founder of a commonwealth. President Washington, Adair continues on page 18, who was away from Philadelphia on his tour of the southern states that spring, had asked Hamilton and the other cabinet members to consult with each other if any urgent business developed that required dispatch. One such occasion did arise, and Jefferson invited John Adams, the vice president, and Hamilton, secretary of the Treasury, to dine with him in his lodgings to confer on the problem. After the cloth was removed, Jefferson reports, and our question agreed and dismissed, conversation began on other matters. The room being hung around with a collection of the portraits of remarkable men, among them those of Bacon, Newton, Eggs, Toast, and Locke. Hamilton asked me who they were. I did not know that people knew who Kevin Bacon was back then, but apparently. Um, uh, I told him they were my trinity of the 3 greatest men the world had ever produced. naming them Bacon, Newton, and Locke. He, Hamilton, paused for some time. The greatest man, he said, that ever lived was Julius Caesar. This are you guys catching this? No, you maybe you're not catching this. I don't know. Well, let's listen. Let's listen. Let's listen. Maybe you are catching it. I don't know. But this is 1791. 9 years later, there's an election in 1800, which is what Ed Larson, the Pulitzer Prize winning historian who had his box right next to mine at Pepperdine, and he requested it too. He said, "I'm out of here if you take my box, Larson, and put it next to anybody else but Mathers." And it has nothing to do with alphabetical order. It has to do with the priorities. Well, he wrote a book called A Magnificent Catastrophe about that 1800 election. You can see that Hamilton and Jefferson are colleagues at this time, right, in the Washington administration, and they're discussing business. And now they're, talking about other things, and you can see the tension, the deeper disputes here about who was the best. Jefferson is naming Kevin Bacon, and he said it's because he saw a flash dance and could not get that out of his mind. And, I'm sure that engendered a huge dispute about what's better, Quicksilver or flash dance. And Quicksilver, he's on the 10 speed. Flash dance, he's on his own feet. Well, sorry, not flash dance. Oh my gosh. Footloose. Oh my gosh. Flash dance. Footloose. Wow, I screwed that one up. Yeah, Footloose. It was whether it was Quicksilver or Footloose. Um, man, I screwed that one up. Okay, I'm gonna take my leave from this joke. I'm gonna go back to being serious. Okay, and yes, I do weave in out of these lines of being serious and being, and I'm trusting that you're not that much of an idiot to know that I'm not, that Jefferson is talking about Kevin Bacon. But I mean, hey, you know, um, um, Newton's first name was Fig, by the way. Um, uh, okay, sorry. Um, I clearly need a little bit more coffee. It's 9:53 a.m. You would think that I got this. I got this. I've had my coffee. Jefferson names thinkers is the point. He names men who were writers and thinkers and took the life of the mind very seriously. And Hamilton names Julius Caesar, who was a writer, but that's not primarily what he's known for is writing. He's known for what he wrote about, which is stuff he participated in, which is basically taking out what was then called Gaul for the Romans. Victory, victory in battle for Rome, going all the way into what we now call the British Isles with elephants on the beaches of Dover, fighting what we call Celts or Britons. Okay. Um, um, Now this this is very well articulated by Adair here. This dramatic confrontation between the mature Hamilton and the mature Jefferson is significant not because of the conclusion that Jefferson drew from it, that Hamilton in 1791 was a secret enemy of our Republican Constitution, which as Secretary of the Treasury he had sworn to uphold, or that Hamilton was already working to overthrow the Republic and to establish himself as a Caesar. Jefferson, you idiot. You see, these assumptions that people make, they just think the worst of you. Um, but because it allows us to discover both Jefferson and Hamilton, revealing a shared commitment to fame in its maximum glory. The most explicit and revealing gloss on this profoundly revealing scene can be found in the writings of that time. Oh, sorry, can be found in the writings of that same Sir Francis Bacon, the first of Jefferson's Trinity, whose picture Jefferson carried with him wherever he went, much as a devout Roman Catholic maintains a shrine with images and pictures in his home. In Bacon's essays, a Renaissance equivalent of Dale Carnegie's success manual showing how to win powerful friends, and influence top people in a fiercely competitive hierarchical society, Bacon notes that praise is the reflection of virtue, but it is as the glass which giveth the reflection. If it be from the common people, it is commonly false and naught. For the common people understand not many excellent virtues. The lowest virtues draw praise from them. The middle virtues work in them astonishment and or admiration. But of the highest virtues, they have no sense of perceiving at all. That's a quote from Bacon. However, if that's a quote from Bacon, then Denny's really should have that on their menu somewhere to feature that, or on like their cups or something, you would think. However, if persons of quality and judgment concur, the judgment of these people of quality is like unto a sweet ointment and will not easily away. That's the quote. Will not easily away. Okay. The winning of honor is but the revealing of a man's virtue and worth. And then Bacon offered a five-stage classification of the highest, the ultimate in fame and honor, a ladder of glory that guaranteed immortal remembrance to those great men and forceful enough to win to the top levels. The lowest or fifth stage of Bacon's pyramid of sovereign honor is allocated to those rulers of states who are called patres patriae, fathers of their country, which reign justly and make the times good where they live. And Bacon named examples. More famous and hence in fourth place are the propagunatores imperii, propagnatores imperii, champions of the empire, such as in honorable wars, enlarge their territories, or make noble defense against invaders. Ranked above them, in third place from the very top, stand Salvatores Imperii, saviors of the empire. Let me take a look. I mean, I'm skipping that footnote. You can take a look at it. Get a physical copy of this and follow along. You won't regret it. Saviors of the empire, page 20 at the top, such as compound the long miseries of civil war or deliver their country from the servitude of strangers or tyrants, as Augustus Caesar, King Henry VII of England, King Henry IV of France. In second place, marshaled on the rarefied level just below the top rank of sovereign honor and fame, stand the legislatores, the great lawgivers, who are called perpetui principis, the principal, or so the perpetual rulers, because they govern by their ordinances after they are gone. Such were Lycurgus, Solon, Justinian. Finally, The ultimate peak of honor and fame in the first place are the contemporaries imperiorum, the founders of states and commonwealths. Conditores imperiorum, founders of states and commonwealths, such as were Romulus, Cyrus, Ottoman, and significantly Julius Caesar. This is from Bacon, whom for whom Jefferson had such great reverence. Bacon said Julius Caesar was in the top class, and that's what Hamilton was saying. Even though Jefferson, okay, you see this, right? Hamilton's statement then in the spring of 1791 and that he considered Caesar the greatest man that ever lived did not necessarily carry the sinister undertones that Jefferson would impute to the statement 20 years later. In 1791, the French Revolution was still in its honeymoon state. All the great powers of the Atlantic community were at peace, and neither Jefferson nor Hamilton that April could foresee the outbreak of war between England and France in 1793, which would so profoundly affect the politics of the United States and which would give Hamilton the chance to contemplate the use of an American army raised in 1798 in the quasi-war with France as a weapon of domestic politics directed against Jefferson and his party. In 1791, Napoleon, still unknown to history, had not yet begun his bloody march toward world empire that reached its climax in 1811 and gave a new and contemporary meaning to Caesarism. In 1791, Dr. Rush himself, who shuddered appropriately in 1811 at Jefferson's anecdote of Hamilton's admiration of Caesar, had casually set down in a letter to Jeremy Belknap his admiration of Caesar's greatness. Perhaps, so Rush wrote, unequaled in the history of mankind. That's a direct quote. Looking at footnote 12 really quick. It's about Machiavelli. Yeah, that's a good quote from Machiavelli. Okay. Page 21. But when Hamilton named Caesar as the greatest of men, did he think of him as the immortal founder of a commonwealth? It is surely not enough merely to show that Bacon and perhaps others thought of the divine Julius thus. What is needed is specific evidence to prove that Hamilton viewed the great Roman so, that Hamilton's admiration of Caesar was married in his mind to the problems and opportunities facing the leaders of the American Revolution as conditores imperiorum. Listen to Alexander Hamilton speak in 1778, 13 years before his dialogue with Jefferson. In a pamphlet significantly signed with the pseudonym Publius, it was the first time, but not the last, that Hamilton would identify himself with this famous figure from Plutarch. Which Publius is this? Quote, this is Hamilton writing under the pseudonym Publius in 1778, a figure from Plutarch. The station of a member of Congress is the most illustrious and important of any I am able to conceive. He is to be regarded not only as a legislator, but as a founder of an empire. A man of virtue and ability, dignified with so precious a trust, would rejoice that fortune had given him birth at a time and place and circumstances so favorable for promoting human happiness. He would esteem it not more than the, he would esteem it not more the duty than the privilege and ornament of his office to do good to all mankind. From this commanding eminence, he would look down with contempt upon every mean or interested pursuit. Hamilton, page 21 at the bottom. This is back to Adair. Hamilton undoubtedly thought of Caesar, identified himself with the Caesar who was the founder of the Commonwealth. Hamilton undoubtedly thought of Caesar, identified himself with the Caesar who was the founder of a Commonwealth. Hamilton believed himself to be one who, through the grace of fortune, was destined to establish an American empire that could promote the happiness of the human race and at the same time reward Alexander Hamilton with fame and immortality. Gerald Storrs is entirely correct when he argues that this statement over the signature of Publius in 1778 is the most revealing, probably, that the mature Hamilton ever wrote, showing his own conception of his life work and the ultimate goal of his ambition. But what of Jefferson's competing category of immortal fame? Where in the 18th century do Bacon, Newton, and Locke stand in relation to Caesar, the soldier legislator, conditor imperiorum? Again, it is Sir Bacon who provides a clue. In his Advancement of Learning, published 8 years after he had placed Romulus and Caesar at the very pinnacle of fame, Bacon offered a second thought and an even higher category of greatness by adding a sixth rank, superior even to founders of empires and commonwealths. Bacon in 1605 argued that the greatest glory should be awarded to those philosophers who would call themselves scientists. We would call them scientists, sorry. We would call them scientists and inventors who had employed the divine gift of reason to use and benefit of to the use and benefit of mankind. Such men exemplified the ultimate combination of the qualities of action and contemplation, of thought and deed, that dignify and exalt human nature. In contrast, Bacon's earlier hierarchy of fame had chiefly honored men of action, soldiers and statesmen, some of whom had been worshipped after their death as demigods. Caesar, for example, and most of the later Roman emperors had been voted divine honors by the Roman Senate. Footnote 14 is excellent. I'm going to keep going, though. Roman Senate, which had decreed temples in their honor and added them as lesser deities to the pantheon of dei majores. Now, my thought is, if the Senate is doing this conferring, um, Mitch McConnell. All right, never mind. Bacon's later and highest category of immortal fame looked to these major gods of classical civilization. Deification, Bacon noted, was the highest honor among the heathens. That is, to obtain veneration as a god was the supreme respect which man could pay man. But the political honors distributed by antiquity to such as Caesar by formal act of the state were inferior to the voluntary internal assent and acknowledgement that was accorded by the ancients to inventors and authors of new arts or discoveries for the service of human life, who were ever advanced among the greater gods, as in the case of Ceres, Bacchus, Mercury, Apollo, and others. Clearly, in Bacon's mind, as he reconsidered the problem, the human honors by senatorial vote were inferior to this fame, heroical and divine, because founders of states, lawgivers, extirpers of tyrants, fathers of the people, and other titles of heroes and demigods such as Hercules, Theseus, Minos, Romulus, etc., This distinction between the lesser and greater fame between demigods and major gods, in Bacon's view, was made with great justice and judgment, for the merits of the former statesmen and soldiers were generally confined within the circle of one age or nation, but and are but the fruits uh, and are but the fruitful showers which serve only for a season and a small extent, while the others, the philosopher inventors, are like the benefits of the sun, permanent and universal. Moreover, the deeds of legislators and generals are mixed with strife and contention, while the gifts to mankind of the scientists, philosophers have the true character of the divine presence as coming without tumult and noise. So Jefferson is on the side of the philosopher inventor, the the thinker and service of mankind as greater than Julius Caesar. And Hamilton is not as impressed with that. That's at least what we've been talking about here. But the overarching, that's just an example of a dispute back then among founders, our founders, founding fathers. Who is right? Which is greater? And Adair will share more about what he thinks about that coming up on future episodes of The Republican Professor. We've been interacting with this wonderful speech by Douglas Adair called Fame and the Founding Fathers. Fame and the Founding Fathers, made available by Liberty Fund Press. Go out and get your physical copy today, made available by Liberty Fund Press. We want to thank Liberty Fund for making this material available. And thanks for joining me on the Republican Professor podcast. I've been your host, Dr. Lucas J. Mather. We will pick up there next time. It's been TRP 28 July 2026. It's a Tuesday. And we'll go through the rest of this as quickly as we can, starting on page 23. We'll talk to you guys later. God bless you guys. See ya.